My name is Bill Lederer. I was drafted into the Army after failing out of Notre Dame 2 years of college, 1953. And I served in the Army in Germany, occupied Germany at the time, for 2 years. At that time, I taught 1st to 5th grade to privates, corporals, and sergeants. It was a turning point in my life. I got to see that other side of America, of the very poor and uneducated. And we all became friends. It was just a wonderful experience. And I remembered my men. I'd go into the PX with them and make sure that they weren't cheated, because they didn't know. They relied on whatever they got as change, and they were scammed on occasion. And so I saw that part of America, and then we developed a very close relationship with them. Then I got out of the service after serving 2 years, and got married right away to my childhood sweetheart. I blame her for flunking out of Notre Dame to begin with, but she wouldn't accept that. Anyway, and then I became very serious in life. I wanted to be a psychoanalyst, so I went to University of Southern California for 2 years in pre-med, and then I went to Marquette Med School for 2 years. But in that interim period, I started writing. I teach a class here at Chestnut and have a great class. It's amazing, really. Of course, all of my teachers, all of my students have lived a long life, so they have a lot to write about. But it's the same way I teach also at Statesville Correctional Center. This is a prison. Right now, we haven't taught there for a good year because of COVID, but I've been teaching there for 42 years. They've experienced a lot. They've experienced through the necessities of life.
You're talking about the inmates?
The inmates. I've seen how they have a lot of material to write about, the extremes of life, life and death situations, and they're teaching me all the time. The ones in prison most of them are lifers. They're not going to get out. I've known 3 in my 40 years that were in my class that got out. But they still have this sensitivity for looking to the external world and seeing what has gone wrong, the prejudices, but also they can look within and see where they've failed too. They all sort of wish to tell their story, let's put it that way. And they all had interesting stories. Just to give you an example of one, a fellow that was cleaning up my class after we had finished, he told me, he said, "I want to tell you about my life." He said, "I'd done a lot of bad things. I killed 3 people in a shootout." And he said, "But I'll tell you why I did what I did." He said, "I could make a couple $1,000s a week. And so it was in my mind, if I were pushing, I could make that much money. And so I did it for my family. My family really needed money. And so I did that." He said that was a foolish thought. And here I am, and I've done some very bad things. But you can understand this fellow. You know, the thing that he resents most of all about prison is he feels he's being warehoused. He'd like to do something for the community. He'd like to return to the community and tell them this is the bad way to go, what I did. And he says, I can speak to them. They all know me from the past. And so he'd love to do that. In Germany, it was milder, their problems than the ones in prison who have killed. So in Germany, though, it was seeing that same environment that these fellows that had been drafted. I get a kick out of I felt very close to them. I was privileged as a kid. My father was the neighborhood bookie, so I was able to benefit from his earnings. But the kids, my friends and all that, it was interesting. We all had gangs. Every graduating class from our grammar school, we created gangs, but they were gangs based on softball or sports. But the same ones who I taught 40 years later, the gangs had developed into harder stuff, into crime, and dope was a big deal, and that's what happened. But I could just see with a few bad turns, I could have been in their place. I was a member of the Mustangs. That was the name of our gang. But we were the wimpiest gang on the South Side. I was never diagnosed with dyslexia, but I'm almost sure I had it because I could not read. I had run, by the time I got to college, I had maybe read one book that was assigned to me, but I had trouble reading, going from one sentence to the next. And I remember my parents sending me to reading schools, and I could never get it. They'd have a shutter that would come down that would make you read quicker, and I'd be hitting that shutter to go up and all that. And so I was curious with my students, what did they have reading problems? Half my class had. Half of my class throughout, 40 years period. And I wondered, they were looked down upon probably by their teachers, not given as much attention. And I know that was how it was with me, so I was a show-off in class. I did all these zany things and even got kicked out of grammar school. Here's the interesting thing about dyslexia. A lot of poets are dyslexic, including Yeats, who was one of the great poets of the early 20th century. When asked, do your grandparents or parents appreciate your poetry? And he says, no, they can't read. So he's a poster adult for dyslexia. And what a dyslexics, where a weakness can be a strength, is that because we are very slow readers, and I'm a slow reader to this day, the inconsistencies of language, the double meanings by contorting the language, that's the bread and butter of good poetry. So many poets are that way. And another thing about it too, because you work so hard to understand stuff, you have a good memory. A weakness can be your strength. And a quote that I use with my class at Statesville is Shakespeare's beautiful line. He says, "Adversity is like the toad. While it looks ugly and venomous, it wears a jewel in the center of its forehead." That, for short, is you can learn from adversity. Don't give up.